Welcome back to a brand new episode of the MMA Beat. It is Thursday, December 1st, 2016. Hello again, everyone. I'm Mario Helwani, back inside our New York City studio. Unbelievable that we have finally made it to the final month of 2016, and you know, it's apropos. In my opinion, this has been the most newsworthy year in the history of mixed martial arts, the short history of MMA, but it has certainly been very, very newsworthy every single month, and somewhat apropos that since we last spoke around 8 days ago, so much has happened. We have so much to get to. Let's get right into it. I can't wait for today's show. All right, here's the panel. That's Luke Thomas of SiriusXM and MMAfighting.com. That is the man in the shirt, Jeff Wagenheim of the Washington Post. And making his long-awaited return to our New York City studio, that is Mark Ramundi of MMAfighting.com. Welcome back, Mark.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me.
Yes.
Wow.
Thank you for being so late. Mark just arrived like 2 minutes ago. Almost tried to pull a Conor McGregor on us, but he is here. Sans mink coat. Okay.
I was trying to buy one on the way here, and it just didn't work out for me. I was in the Diamond District.
That's right. Okay. Well, thank you for coming. It's great to have you. Guys, like I said, so much to discuss. Wow. What a difference a week makes in mixed martial arts. Let's start with the official launch of the Mixed Martial Arts Athletes Association, the MMA AA.
Triple A.
Well, MMA AA.
Oh,
Double
right,
M,
yes.
Triple A.
Yes.
Yes.
Big news yesterday. 5 UFC fighters come out along with former Bellator CEO Bjorn Rebney. The 5 UFC fighters, of course, former welterweight champion George St. Pierre, former heavyweight champion Cain Velasquez, former bantamweight champion TJ Dillashaw, and Tim Kennedy, along with Donald Cowboy Cerrone, hold a 2+ hour conference call to announce the launch of this association. So much to unpack here. And Luke, I know that this is somewhat of an open-ended question right off the top, but just listening to that conference call, taking it all in, and remembering that this year we've seen the launch of the PFA, the Professional Fighters Association. We know that the MMAFA is out there. This has been a hot topic this year. What did you make of what they said, and perhaps who said it and how they said it Wednesday afternoon?
Man, I had a bunch of different feelings on so the good side of things. I guess non-negative in any way. I have to qualify it in that way. But I guess what I mean is, it felt different. It felt different than the MMAFA, which isn't to say they haven't made an impact and haven't had a time in the sun. But they had 5 fighters, 3 former champions, 2 that are, one's a top contender, another one who's actually still pretty much a top contender from all the big camps, not all the big camps, but many of the big camps. This is something that the PFA in the same week where they lost Lucas Middlebrook and Leslie Smith couldn't even come close to sniffing. MMAFA has, like I mentioned before, has done a lot of good work, but I think that they get sometimes unfairly labeled as a collection of former fighters or malcontents. And this, you can't label them that way. That just doesn't work. And the amount of newsworthy attention it was gathering and the media who's paying attention, it felt categorically different than some of these other organizing efforts. On the other hand, Bjorn Rebney's appearance and that same old promoter speak that he's been doing felt very inauthentic. I still wonder why you have investors for an organization that you claiming is ultimately interested in not a money grab. I mean, they are trying to get more equitable treatment and higher pay, but they're not, as they put it, trying to just take money however they can. But you've got investors. That felt kind of weird. there's a lot of questions about it, but I guess I could say, as the big picture to wrap up here, and we'll get into all the other manifestations of it, it feels like, and Chuck kind of wrote something to this morning on MMA Fighting, it feels like to me, everyone from the high ranks to the low ranks is trying to push the UFC machine to see what happens when they do, to see if they can find a crack in the armor, to see if they can get a reaction out of it. People, remember the T-Rex in Jurassic Park testing the fence, the velociraptors, I think, testing the fence to see if they get shocked? That's what you're seeing here. They're seeing if they can get shocked by it. If not, they can pass it up.
Yeah, I think, the number one response I had, and you mentioned the words, the name, Bjorn Rebney. I mean, that was, to me, it was like, Bjorn Rebney, question mark, question mark, question mark. It was kind of a, like, holy crap, this guy is like, it's like the first time that people in MMA have seen him for, a couple of years now.
2.5 years.
And all of a sudden he just shows up in this crowd. I mean, it was kind of it was a strange presence, and in some ways it kind of distracted a little bit from the other guys who are up there. And look, they had 2 guys up there who, well, you have George St. Pierre, of course, who's the star of all stars, but then you have 2 other guys who are, a heartbeat away from being champions. I mean, TJ Dillashaw, a former champion, Cain Velasquez, a former champion. Both those guys very soon could be wearing UFC gold again, and it would not surprise anybody to see that happening. But just looking at the faces up there in the pictures of this meeting, it's just the fact that they're not anonymous. I mean, that is the big thing. I mean, what was the big complaint that happened with the other organization that Middlebrook and Leslie Smith walked away from? They were complaining because these guys had revealed the names of some fighters who supposedly were supporting it. And so there's always been this kind of, oh, we're going to talk about a union. Well, okay, let's go into a dark closet and not really reveal ourselves. Well, here were some really prominent fighters who were stepping right out front and very publicly throwing their names behind it. And that's a big deal.
I thought it was interesting because, as Jeff said, it was the first time that multiple really high-profile names came out and said this was what they were going to do, and they supported a movement to either unionize or form an association. This is not a union, by the way. It's going to be an association. That's a whole other topic, probably, possibly another day. For now. But the other thing, the one thing I noticed that just on social media, there was more buzz around this announcement, in a good way and a bad way, positive and negative. There were a lot of fighters who were like, I saw them tweeting at Tim Kennedy and tweeting at Cowboy Cerrone saying, I'm going to call you, DM me your number, whatever. But I also saw people on the other side saying, Bjorn Rebney is involved with this. Well, if he's involved, I'm out. Malkikawa came out and said that King Mo had that very funny Instagram post from yesterday. I think Luke Rockhold commented on that post that King Mo had saying, yeah, if Bjorn Rebney is involved, I don't want to be involved. It's polarizing, and the last thing that you want in a unification effort for fighters is to be polarizing. You want unification. This is the opposite of that. I want to wait to see what they have to say. And I don't think you can dismiss it off the bat because you don't like Bjorn Rebney and maybe some of the things that he's done in the past you were not a fan of. I don't think you can dismiss them. I think they need to listen, at least listen to all the people, the Jeff Boris's, the MMA FAs of the world, and then see what is best. But it would be nice to consolidate, right, if you're the fighters, to have one thing to move forward with.
This is, to that point, I think is exactly the issue. You've got PFA, whatever happens to them, I don't know. You got MMA FA, which is still very much interested in being involved. In fact, Randy Couture saying he wants to reach out to them. This can only benefit them, but it has to work. Somebody has to take a hold of this, because if you have a rebellion, but it's disjointed, you don't have a rebellion. Right? So you've got all these different factions vying. I don't know who is going to win out. I don't know who needs to win out, but someone does, because if they don't, this is all for nothing.
Let's talk about the Bjorn Rebney angle for a second. Is it fair that so many people are dismissing this group right off the bat solely because of his involvement? Because you have to think that if he wasn't involved, if it was just those 5 fighters and maybe a lawyer or two, there'd be less criticism, because who's going to criticize George St. Pierre? He is so well liked. Cain Velasquez, so well liked. Dillashaw, Kennedy, Cerrone, they all have their own, fan bases, so to speak, and supporters. Is it fair to do that? Because let's just throw out this analogy, and it's not apples to apples, I get it. But if a, notorious drug dealer decides to change his stripes and goes and joins the FBI
How about
to help
Victor Conti?
Victor Conti.
Right.
Do we dismiss him right off the bat, or do we say, look, this guy was in on the ground floor, this guy has been on the front lines, this guy has screwed over other people, he knows what it means to get screwed over and to screw over as well. This is the guy that we want if he has truly changed his stripes. Is it fair to dismiss him off the bat, or has he done enough bad that it's somewhat justified?
It is totally fair to dismiss him. What reformation? He goes away for 2.5 years and comes back. Ta-da! He pops out of the cake. Hey, look, guys, I'm back, and I just have a different shirt on. Did you notice when he was a promoter, he always had all black on?
Yep.
And he had all black on, except a nice white shirt. Boy, I noticed that right away in that picture. To me, it's like, look, if you're a promoter, does that make you a bad person? No. If you're an aggressive promoter, does that make you a bad person? Even then, no. Was he really doing things any worse than the UFC? I know a lot of fighters had some bad run-ins with those guys. How many fighters have had bad run-ins with the UFC over the years? A gazillion. So I don't know that he's categorically any worse. Maybe he is, but it's not. I don't think it's an open and shut case, but he's done some, promoter-like things. But to then disappear and come back all of a sudden, and you're doing the same kind of thing that you were before, which is, number one, you're trying to sort of tick away at the UFC. You've gathered funds. You've got a business plan. You've put together this cast of very respectable characters to help you do it. It feels like they're using some of his talents, his organizing, fundraising talents, in a positive way. But he was trying to distance himself while not distancing himself too much. He never came around and was like, man, over the past 2.5 years, I've done some reflection, and the things we did as promoters really weren't okay, and we got to fix this. And he didn't say anything about Bellator at all. This just seemed like his old axe to grind against the UFC, just with a new shirt on, as opposed to anything else.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, as Luke says, I think it's fair for some people to dismiss him, but I think the more prudent approach would be to let him prove himself. If he's really turned over a new leaf. I mean, look at, we brought up Victor Conte. I mean, that guy, when he started going on social media and talking about steroids, I remember the time, I remember myself tweeting back directly at him and kind of attacking him. And I remember other people as well just saying, who are you to come out here, on your high horse and preach to us? Well, let's see what Rebney has. You're right. He's been inside the belly of the beast, but he's been the beast. I think Eddie Alvarez wants to do business with this guy again. I don't think so.
Also, very, very quickly, Conte stayed on Twitter and answers the criticism and goes after him and responds and responds and responds. This guy disappeared and then just came back.
Well, now he has become active again, so let's see.
Propped up back on Twitter now.
Sure, and I do believe he had some kind of NDA after leaving Bellator,
He did.
so he couldn't really speak
but yesterday
too much
was a
about
chance to speak to some of these things.
I
paid everyone 53%.
Sure.
Any fact or any claim issued without evidence can be dismissed without evidence. So that's what I do to that.
For the initial coming out party, was it a mistake to have him so prominently involved? Should they have just done it with the 5 fighters?
Possibly just for solely PR reasons, maybe, because he is a figure that has been widely criticized, and he did sue Eddie Alvarez, who is a pretty well-known and respected and well-liked guy in the UFC and in the world of MMA. But I don't think you can just outright dismiss everything that was said on that call because Bjorn Rebney is involved. You can't dismiss the words of George St. Pierre, of Tim Kennedy. These are smart, educated guys who have been through it all. Donald Cerrone, who was a company man for a very long time, and he walked the company line, and now he's starting to kind of see the way things are going and how it is. And I don't think you can just say, we're going to throw this whole thing out just because Bjorn Rebney is involved, because that's also not productive. I think you just need to listen and see what they have to say and talk to Tim Kennedy if you're a fighter, talk to Donald Cerrone, talk to George St. Pierre. They seem like they're going to be open to that. They offered, hit me up on Twitter, call me, we'll get behind you. I don't think we can just outright, or they should outright dismiss it just because Bjorn Rebney's involved. Sure, it's a red flag, and you can question it and have speculation, but you can't just say, no, I'm not dealing with this just because he's there.
Yeah. Also, why was he in those pictures? That picture where they're all in the T-shirts. Yeah. Why is Bjorn Rebney in that picture? If he's not on the board, to me, it's tone deaf of them to think it's an asset to add him to that picture. If it's just the 5 guys that were on the call, to me that looks it's so much more impactful than if this other guy is standing there who sued Eddie Alvarez. I don't understand what they were thinking.
Did his words seem genuine to you guys? Did it feel?
Does he make occasionally strong arguments? Yes, he does. But do I believe him is he the labor organizing force? He has no background in labor organizing. This is the guy? I don't know, man.
I mean, he sounds genuine because that's what he does for a living. He's a promoter. If Dana White were standing in a meeting like that, he could have made himself sound very believable, because this is what these guys do. They are out there to sell you on what they want to sell you, and so of course he sounded like he sounded believable. But I'm with Luke. I don't really think that I don't think that you can. I would not call it a red flag as you were. I would call it more of a yellow flag. I would say, pump the brakes, be careful, and make sure that if you're going to jump into this, make sure you're jumping into it in something that's going to be working correctly, and not something that's just a con to get at the UFC. Because really, that's what Bjorn made a living at, trying to snipe at the UFC. And this could be looked at as another opportunity for him to snipe at the UFC. That's not what the fighters are trying to do. They're just trying to make a living and better their lives and the lives of all the other fighters. But I just want to understand what Rebney's motivation is.
Let me ask you this, Mark. You were at that press conference in Las Vegas prior to UFC 202 when the PFA held this press conference at the Signature Hotel, and only 2 fighters showed up, one in the UFC, Leslie Smith, the other, Matt Mitrione. And the very first thing that Jeff Boris said at this press conference was that he reached out to the UFC and they wouldn't really reciprocate in any kind of response, and it was like it was a little confrontational right off the bat, right? Right off the bat, it wasn't about we're here to change, we're here to better the lives of the fighters. It was a shot at Dana White and company. And I remember talking to the people involved in the PFA and telling them that I thought that this was a very big mistake. You don't need to be so confrontational. This is about making the fighters' lives better. This is about changing things, not about making headlines and getting into a fight with Dana White and company. Do you think, with that in mind, that Bjorn was too confrontational, saying, calling the UFC an egregious, predatory organization, taking shots at them? Was that a mistake? Because I actually felt that Kennedy, GSP, Kane, and Dillashaw, I'll exclude Cerrone, who didn't really say all that much. I thought he was genuine, but didn't really add much as far as feelings and thoughts were concerned. I thought they all spoke very eloquently, non-confrontationally. They were just speaking from the heart. I mean, Kane, to say that he's having surgery after his fight, already scheduled that surgery, is just an amazing thing to hear from a guy like Cain Velasquez, who's always so guarded. And then Bjorn's tone was a little different.
Sure.
Is that a mistake? Was that a mistake on his part?
I don't know if I would say it was definitely a mistake, but I definitely understand where you're coming from, and I don't disagree about how the PFA went about things. A lot of fighters in the UFC don't hate the UFC. There's a difference between hating the UFC and wanting your fair share. Those two things are not mutually exclusive. You can have one, and the other. You can like the UFC and want to work with them and want to fight for them, obviously. And I think, like you said, a lot of the guys on the call, George St. Pierre, Tim Kennedy, DJ Dillashaw, Cain Velasquez, kind of intimated that we want to make the UFC better. This is the way to make the UFC better. We're not trying to fight the UFC on this. If it comes to that, we'll fight the UFC, but we're trying to work together to advance the sport. I thought that was the better tack to take than just being outright and calling them, what was the egregious, predatory monopoly was Bjorn Rebney's term. Now, I understand why you'd want to do that, because and I understood why PFA did it too, that you want to get their attention right away. You want to get fighters' attention, but sometimes fighters don't want to hear that the place that they've been working for 5-6 years is awful first. They want to maybe, sugarcoat it first and then kind of work to that if it gets bad.
I do think that it's good to have somebody there who is not just one of the fighters. I mean, I agree with you, Luke, that once they took the photograph, that should be the fighter. Those are the guys. But when Jeff Boris had his press conference, I remember at the time, even though he was being confrontational, I remember thinking, this is a guy who's been in the trenches in the mainstream sports world, and he's a serious player, and he's got things done over the years. It turns out that in this sport, people tend to be very, very wary of anybody who's not inside that bubble, and so he's sort of getting pushed away a little bit. But Bjorn Rebney clearly has been inside the MMA bubble, but people are wary of him because of the way he's operated inside there. So somewhere along the line, that they need to have some professional who can have a little gravitas and somebody who's got some weight behind him, but the fighters can really trust.
Let me ask you this, and maybe that's where George and Kane and TJ come into play. I thought one thing that really stood out to me was when Bjorn was asked, have you reached out to the UFC, and do you plan on reaching out to the UFC? Answer to the first question, no, we haven't yet. Answer to the second question, we don't plan on doing so. Is that the right move? I mean, is it the UFC's move to reach out to them first, or should it be on them, the group that's coming in trying to change things? Is it on them to reach out to the UFC first? And should they have reached out already?
Yeah, I don't understand that logic at all. Now, I don't know who should contact who first. In fact, I don't suspect the UFC is in any current position to even make contact, because then that's sort of almost de facto.
But why would the UFC contact them?
They shouldn't.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no reason why they should.
Shouldn't it be on them to contact the UFC?
Should be on them. And this is what I didn't understand, and I made this point, and I was like, DeMaurice Smith and Roger Goodell talk all the time.
Yeah.
And it is true that if you read NFLPA press releases, DeMaurice Smith's or George Atala's language can often be very, very blunt and matter of fact and strong. But A, there's already that NFLPA in place, and B, I think the key mistake that everyone makes, be it PFA or Rebney in some of his language, again, he did make some other strong arguments, but to the point you're highlighting, they think that what the fighters want to hear is this super strong show of force. They do, but they also want someone who can deftly handle and calmly navigate the channels to get something done. Just coming out and saying, I'm going to beat the UFC over the head with my verbiage, I don't think the fighters hear that and think, I can take you seriously. What I want to hear is a plan of action. We have certain demands, but what they want to feel like is that the rightness and the nobility of the cause will carry itself forward. Not that we need fiery rhetoric to launch this into the next space.
Do you think
I
if
also think there's a lot of I think there's a lot of steps to be taken before they need to reach out to the UFC. I don't think that I'm not sure I would say it's inappropriate for them to do that now, but I think it's something that it's not necessary.
No plans on it. You got no plans on it,
I mean,
really?
Look, at some point they have to. But they have to reach out with some bulk. They've got to have a membership. I mean, the only reason Roger Goodell takes Smith's calls is because, well, not just because, he has to because that guy represents all these football players. What are these guys? These guys yesterday represent 5 people right now. I mean, a few people came on Twitter and said, "Yeah, I'm with you." So maybe they're up to a dozen. Well, they've got about 400 and something people that they really have to try to consolidate.
Should they have waited?
I don't think they need to wait in order to make this announcement, but I think that. But your question was why they're not reaching out to the UFC. They have no plans on doing. Eventually, once if they get 300 fighters strong and growing, at some point it'll be appropriate for them to say, hey, here, we want you to listen to us now.
Part of me wonders if James Quinn, who's now George St. Pierre's lawyer, if he were on the call saying similar things.
He was in the room.
He was in the room.
Didn't talk.
Right, and if he was saying similar things that he said in interviews, with ESPN and with us at MMAfighting.com, I wonder if it would be perceived differently because he's someone who is on the outside, which maybe could be a negative. Like you said, maybe some people in the MMA bubble don't want to hear people from the outside say that kind of stuff, but he also doesn't have that kind of reputation that Bjorn Rebney has as far as being bad for fighters. He's a guy that he's a powerhouse guy in the labor law industry. He was the counsel for in lawsuits against the NFL and the NBA, and both of those lawsuits ended up with free agency for both leagues. That's a really big deal, and that's a big guy to have on your side. Part of me wonders if he was the guy talking and saying some of those things, it would be perceived differently by fighters who don't like Bjorn Rebney.
Okay, let me ask you this. I saw a lot of fighters, media members, people have said this to me privately as well. They didn't say enough. I wanted more details. I wanted to know more. And I'm wondering, and they were certainly asked to share, and they said, no, we're not going to do that. Why should they reveal all their cards on a press call? Shouldn't it be up to them to now reach out to the fighters or vice versa? Give me what you got. Is it, in hindsight, smart to not tell everyone what your plans are step by step? Because I couldn't believe how many times I read this. I saw Will Brooks say, I wanted more. Well, Will, why don't you reach out to them? Or maybe now they've seen his tweets and they reach out. Why should they tell the UFC? Or was it a mistake to not say enough? What do you think?
Yeah, they shouldn't show, you shouldn't put all your cards on the table on day one where here's the MMA AA, here's everything that we're going to do over the next 4 or 5 years. No, of course you don't do that right off the bat. It was a media call. It was really more to get attention, and it wasn't streamed anywhere. It wasn't live. It was really just for the media of the sport for the most part. Yeah, you don't just say outright. They did lay out kind of the goals.
Sure.
They didn't set up the journey to get to achieve any of those goals. They did lay out the goals, and I thought some of them are somewhat ambitious, and not being a union kind of puts you in a weird position where the UFC doesn't actually legally have to negotiate with you for a CBA if you're not a labor union, you're a trade organization, you're a trade association.
So the 3 goals, tell us the 3 goals. The 3 goals are they want to recoup lost wages, right?
They want to settle with the UFC for current and past fighters. They didn't mention any kind of specific amount of money, but I assume that would be a large amount. It's something that James Quinn got from the NFL. He did get that for the NFL players and past players. They want a more equal share of revenue from, they say 8%. We have no idea what that number is. It's probably not that high. It may be 8. I've seen 15 other places. Sure. They want it closer to 50%, which is what other sports have. And the other thing they want is what was the other thing they said?
Collective bargaining.
Yeah, I said that right. Collective bargaining is the other thing they want, which could be hard to attain if you're not a union. Which she said they're not a union right now, but they could be later on, as Luke added before. So those are the 3 things they want to do. They didn't lay out how they're going to do it. But you can't just say, well, they didn't tell us on day one, so hey, they must not be, they have no plan. No, they may have a plan. Just have to reach out to them and see what it is.
Those are things that should be revealed at some point when they have an organization, when they have a membership. They can have meetings behind closed doors, and they'll discuss these things. They'll talk about what they need to go after. What's the number one goal? What is what they're trying to how if they're asking 50%, well, they'll probably settle for something less. And of course, if the UFC, at the same time, the UFC is very soon going to be negotiating a new TV deal, and they're looking to, I think it's go 400% of what they make now. Well, these guys are looking for a 600% raise in fighter revenue. So just imagine how much money is in play here. It would be, it could be a tremendous difference, and even if they don't get anywhere near the 50%.
Just from the TV deal alone, if they got a percentage of that, forget about profit sharing.
Even if they got the same 8% multiplied by 4.
Yeah.
On a new TV deal, that would be tremendous. So then if they can raise that up, so fighters, this is a really good time for the fighters to be looking out for themselves, because this is a time when the money's really going to be out there on the table.
Luke, let me ask you about this. Another issue that was brought up, and it's worth definitely discussing here. 4 of those 5 fighters are represented by CAA. CAA, WME, long-standing rivalry, if you want to call it that. They're the 2 leaders in the talent agency space. Does this, to you, feel like a CAA versus WME feud? Do you feel like this would have happened regardless of whether or not WME bought the UFC back in July? Worth noting that Donald Cerrone isn't a part of the CAA team. He's represented by KHI. Did they need more fighters, non-CAA fighters, a part of that initial group to say, look, this is not a CAA versus WME thing. It just so happens that these guys got on board because we educated them. How did you feel like that came up? Because a lot of people brought up that they felt like this was just CAA trying to take a shot at their quote-unquote rivals.
I don't think it's an unfair question to ask about the structure of this thing. I mean, okay, the board is just those 5 guys for now, but everyone wants to make Rebney this boogeyman. I don't know how credible he is as a advisor or whatever his official title is, but it's the structure of this very entity that gives me the most pause. PFA has its problems, but its structure is not one of them. The MMAFA gives me pause, but its structure is not one of them. This very entity being backed in the way that it is, it's a bit of a head scratcher, and I don't know that all of the criticism that Rebney generates is really fair if we're actually going to look at the larger piece of the puzzle here. So, could they have answered things more? Yeah, I think there are some issues about this thing. Now, again, we don't have enough information to make a fully fleshed out opinion about it. And to your point about the outreach, or rather, I should say, did they give enough information? I'm a guy who likes more info up front, so that's just a personal preference. But to my knowledge, did they give out a hotline or an email that fighters could reach out to if they had any questions? Did they mention anything about the next step is we're going to talk to fighters, we're going to get out there, we're going to beat the streets, and we're going to go to your gyms, and we're going to make this happen? I didn't hear any of that either.
So you felt like it was a lot of empty talk?
We'll see if it's empty, if they actually have those. Maybe they have those plans, they just didn't say it. I don't know, right? But to me, that, they
needed to say more?
Yeah, that's why they call it organizing, because you have to get out. You ever see, I live in the home of labor organizing. Those donkeys go door to door and try to get people from either spreading information, getting donations, whatever the cost, for voting, for not.
Who's to say they're not doing that?
Maybe they will, but the point being is...
They did say they were going to be traveling around the country to different gyms, and I think when Ian McCall chimed in on the call unexpectedly, they did say, yeah, we're going to go to all these different gyms.
They said a lot of things. We'll see if they actually do them.
Sure. Okay, but what about the CAA angle? Jeff, does this feel like
it's a little bit inside politics there. I think.
But is it? These are the 4 fighters represented by CAA.
Right, but
they have no others.
There's no question.
Roy McDonald, sorry, he's a Bellator guy.
There's no question that the people at CAA, would have told their fighters, what's going on, and probably maybe stirred up a little bit something. But unless they are, are you suggesting that maybe they're trying to, mess things up for their competitors?
I'm not suggesting anything. I'm bringing up an issue that was brought up, and it's an elephant in the room, and it was addressed on the call, and I thought it was actually addressed pretty well. Cerrone's not CAA, Rebney doesn't work for CAA, and other fighters that they're obviously going to have to bring on board aren't. Someone has to back this thing.
Yeah.
So maybe it's CAA just educating their guys more.
Yeah, and those guys maybe just got the jump on this thing, and there's this, like I said before, this is 5 fighters at this point. There's no, there's the other things that got brought up. There's no women on this on this group yet. There's nobody else. We've got a large contingent of Brazilian fighters or just fighters from other countries, and there's 1 Canadian fighter and 4 Americans, right?
Who cares? Does that really matter?
But these are the things that people.
You have to start with something.
This is the stuff that people talk about. So whether they're affiliated with this agency or whether they come from that country or whether they're male or female, these are things that have, at some point there has to be some kind of representation so people feel like they are being represented. But I think initially, I don't know. I don't see it as a big deal.
Okay, another issue brought up. Why is it UFC only? And this was brought up when the PFA launched. They said we're focusing on the UFC. I don't understand why people continue to misunderstand this approach. The UFC structure is vastly different than Bellator's and certainly World Series of Fighting. We don't need to go over it, but here's a quick reminder. The Reebok deal, USADA deal, TV deal, it's almost like a different sport. Why would Bellator fighters be entitled to the same privileges as UFC fighters, the same piece of the pie as UFC fighters? They're not working under the same set of circumstances. Why do people not understand this?
I don't know. I think just for sheer collective bargaining reasons, it's way more difficult to collectively bargain with different entities, different companies, than it is to just with the main. I mean, the UFC, if you want to equate it to the NFL or the NBA, there's an NBA Players Association, an NFL Players Association. This would be a similar type of thing, although those are unions, and this one they said it was not going to be a union just yet. I'm not sure why. I think it's just natural, for people who are not in those. In the UFC who are in the Bellator, World Series of Fighting, or people who are in the UFC whose teammates are not in the UFC, it's a natural inclination for them to be like, well, how about these fighters? And the MMAFA does want to represent the non-UFC fighters for the goals that they have, they've set forth for themselves. But no, I think that it is the way to go. What the PFA and the MMAAA, it's a lot of A's. What both of those organizations they want to do is they want to target UFC fighters and they want to organize them. And then maybe if that's successful, then they can move on and they can do maybe the Bellator, whatever it is in that time period. But yeah, I think that is really the only way to go right now if that's what you want to do. The MMAFA wants something different, and that's fine. But I think if you want a trade association, collective bargaining, anytime if you say a CBA, collective bargaining, it has to be just with the UFC at least first.
The world is filled with donks who scan headlines and don't read articles.
What? I can't believe you
It's
said
full
that.
of low information voters who just don't pay attention. The media has said this repeatedly for years. The market share for UFC is something upwards of 90%, and then there's just the remaining part. Does Bellator have a couple of high-priced guys? Yes, they got Fedor, they got Rory McDonald. Okay, everyone knows the story. The money is there. Read the articles, and we don't have to keep going over basic facts.
It's surprising when you hear fighters say this over and over.
They scan headlines and don't read articles.
Another thing I want to ask you about are those same fighters, active UFC fighters. I'm surprised to see some of them. Look, you could say whatever you want, First Amendment, all that stuff, but when you're coming out, and managers as well, when you're coming out right away, 30 minutes into the call and trying to discredit this group, to me, it seems like a mistake, a misstep, because it almost comes across as you're trying to suck up to your promoter. Right. Why not listen? Why not keep your judgments? I'm surprised to see people like come. Don't you recognize that these people are like
agents?
No, well, I'm talking about fighters and then the managers.
Yeah.
You had Tim Kennedy say repeatedly, "I'm here to fight for you." You had George St. Pierre say, "I'm here to fight for you, past, present, future." Why are you putting them down? Don't you want to hear at least what they say? I don't understand the need to go on Twitter or social media right away. The UFC fighters, and there were a few. I saw Will Brooks do it. I saw Josh Barnett do it, crack jokes. These guys are trying to fight for you. They're sticking their neck out for you. There needs to be a little bit more respect there.
I mean, I think part of the Rebney factor kind of legitimized that for some people. I mean, I don't know what legitimized it for me. I mean, certainly, talking about managers, Monkey Kawa was very vocal. I mean, and he's a guy who's guided the John Jones career into the stratosphere, or the dumpster or whatever. So, I mean, come on, everybody is up to that's what I said was obviously not a fair thing to say, but that's what people do now. You go on social media and you pick out anything about anybody, and you just say, "Oh, I'm just going to lob hand grenades in that direction," and I mean, I think that's kind of emblematic of social media. Why should it be any different with this? And so fighters who don't like Rebney's involvement are going to throw that out there. Fighters who are a little, again, this is the first time we've seen prominent fighters talk about, go out there and be photographed talking about a union openly. Up till now it's been kind of in the shadows. So there are still people who are, who are feeling like they need to be company men and stay off there in the shadows.
It's a knee-jerk reaction, and we saw it with PFA when Jeff Boris did his press conference in August. I saw a lot of people on Twitter say, well, what is his angle? What is in it for Jeff Boris? It must be a money grab. He's trying to unionize fighters so he can make money off of this. Now we're seeing it here. What is Bjorn Rebney's angle? People are asking, why is this an axe to grind with the UFC? Why is he doing this now? That kind of thing. The CAA thing. Well, why the CAA obviously has a long-time rivalry with WMEING. Is this just retaliation? Is this just part of the feud extending from Hollywood to MMA? It's a knee-jerk reaction people have. Well, what is the angle? Instead of just listening to what the truths, and there are many truths there, they try to discredit the people who are saying the truths, which is, I guess, just kind of a knee-jerk thing, right? It's just part of our society.
Yeah, I think it's one thing for media to say it. It's another for the people that they're trying to fight for to say right off the bat. I thought one thing that they should have said that they didn't say was that, look, these 23 new investors that are now part owners of the UFC, if you want to call them that. I mean, some of those people, Tom Brady, Cam Newton, they're a part of associations. They're represented by WMEIMG. WMEIMG, through their actions, have already said that we support associations, so we're hopeful that they're going to support ours as well. I mean, that was, to me, like I just hope less confrontation and more just trying to extend the peace offering, trying to say, let's sit, let's talk, let's make it better.
The weight of the cause is what's going to win this debate, not the fiery rhetoric, and not putting in their own stumbling blocks by a guy who used to promote with contracts that were almost borrowed word from UFC contracts. I mean, it's just, they got a fox guard in the hen house here. Why don't people agree all the time? I don't know. You got a fox guard in the hen house.
Yeah.
Maybe that's raising some concerns.
And the other thing that I'd like to see, I think that there's a misconception that the media sometimes is trying to champion these causes or campaign for them. I mean, we really...
Some are.
Fair. We don't stand to gain anything from there being an association, no association. I think that most sane-minded people would say, yeah, probably the fighters deserve a little more than what they're getting. Personally, the one thing I would like to campaign for is for, if they're going to continue coming out with these groups, get on the same page. And if there's anyone out there who is considering putting out a group of their own, stop considering it. No more groups. You can't have another press conference. You need to get on the same page because it is very counterproductive to have 3 that we know of associations, plus that other lawyer group that we're sending out, solicitation. You can't do that. You're wasting all of our times if you're not going to get on the same page. If the MMAFA is going to start tweeting about the MMAAA and putting them down, and then the PFA is going to get involved in that, crap show, the whole thing will never get off the ground. Do you guys agree?
I agree. I just want to clarify what I was saying before. I'm not saying it's not a good thing to think about potential conflicts that these people organizing have and what their motivations might be. I'm not saying that's a bad thing but you can't just outright dismiss what they're saying because of that. You can speculate and you can keep that in the back of your mind, but you can't just dismiss.
Does this happen? Are these the guys? What do you think?
These are more the guys than I've ever felt anyone else was the guys. I thought PFA was going to be the group because, again, I like the details. Here's our plan. We're going to get 30% assigned union cards. We're going to get certified by the NLRB. I thought, wow, they are telling you exactly what they're drawing the straight line between them. And I thought, that's interesting. And then, of course, they have this incredible implosion over the past week while the MMA AAA comes out and does this press conference. I will say, I think having George St. Pierre, a heavy hitter, doing this, man, it's impactful. Yeah. It's super impactful, and I do believe if they can recruit more voices, and Will Brooks is an interesting case because he seemed very skeptical. There was no one on that panel from American Top Team. But what if you had like some kind of gym hero, whoever those ATT guys considered to be, maybe Mike Brown or someone like that.
Cole Miller was very
Cole
active.
Miller was like that. Yeah. These guys are going to start talking to each other, and I think that can be impactful. So look, I think in terms of starting, from a good position, despite all the baggage about is this a proxy war between CAA and WME? What about Rebney? From a starting position, this is the strongest starting position I've seen.
Final word on this topic.
I think that, I agree that it's a really good starting point, but I got to say, right off the bat, I thought that the PFA was going to be the winner for the same reason. Boris was a heavy hitter. A guy came out there, and the way he laid things out initially, I thought, wow, this is the real deal. And then look what happened. That thing is kind of.
He didn't have those fighters behind him, though. And this is the big difference, right?
But right now it's 5 fighters and a few fighters who've tweeted things out.
More than what he had.
We'll see. We'll see.
And how about the fact that 2 of those fighters are fighting next weekend and 2 others are fighting December 30th? This is somewhat unprecedented to see active contenders, former champions, stick their neck out.
I feel like we've got, it's such a first day of this whole thing. yeah, I mean, Boris didn't have all the fighters, but he's a guy that was a heavy hitter in this kind of world. This organization has the negative of Rebny, but the positive of 5 prominent fighters. So, I'm skeptical.
Perhaps what you're advocating is they join forces, sort of like Sirius and XM, right?
Like Voltron.
Yes, let's do it.
Sirius
Okay.
and XM, look at that. Then they produce like a Luke Thomas. And then,
Mark, let's move along. The other big story this week, Conor McGregor. The big story of the year. It doesn't matter what the story pertains to, it's Conor McGregor, it's a big story.
Amazing.
So now this week, it's this. UFC 206 was a thin card. It was, as we said on this show, a headliner injury away from sort of combusting in front of our eyes. It happens. Daniel Cormier gets injured. So the UFC's response is to, after some exploring of different options, they settle on bumping up the Max Holloway versus Anthony Pettis fight to the main event. They make it for the interim featherweight title. They then strip Jose Aldo of his interim featherweight title and make him the official featherweight champion. And then they officially strip Conor McGregor of his featherweight title, leaving him with just one belt around 3 weeks after he became dual champion, the world's most famous arena. So there's so much to unpack here. And you add the story last night, which we will get to, of Conor's team revealing that he has acquired a boxing license in the state of California. There's a lot to unpack here, but the initial decision to strip Conor, your biggest draw, essentially to save one particular card because they weren't going to do it if Cormier remained healthy and was going to fight at 206. That is an undeniable fact. They may have been planning on doing it next month or next year, whatever, but they weren't going to do it last Saturday. What do you make of the decision?
First, I think fans need a flow chart to figure out what just happened.
I hope I explained that correctly.
Yeah. And second, save the card. It doesn't save the card. It doesn't do anything to me. It doesn't. Putting the interim title on the line between Max Holloway and Anthony Pettis, to me, adds no significant amount of pay-per-view buys to that card whatsoever. I don't think it matters at all. I think that it further waters down titles, and you're talking about Conor McGregor not defending the featherweight title for a year. That's not good. That does make the title seem lesser if he's going up and fighting at welterweight and doing all those things than fighting for the lightweight title. But doesn't this also dilute titles when you're just kind of making up another one out of nowhere and putting it on the line because you need, or not even need, you'd want to put a title on the line in a main event. So you're just creating a new interim title. I think this only further. It's just further disrespect to the UFC's titles, honestly. That's really all I see out of it.
What about disrespecting Conor McGregor? Did they do that as well? Because they said initially that he relinquished the belt. He has not said anything since, and it's clear that he didn't really have a say in the matter.
yeah, well, in some way, I believe that him relinquishing a belt, whether they strip it from him or whatever they did, I have no problem with that. I think that's the right move. But I think that the timing of it was very, very poor. And the whole idea to me, all you need to do is say, Conor, your next fight is either going to be the defense of the lightweight belt or the defense of, or actually, if your next fight is a defense of the featherweight belt, you get to keep it until you do that fight. If it's a lightweight, you get to keep your lightweight belt because you just won it. But if you're not fighting featherweight, your next fight, then we're going to take that belt back. That's all you got to do. That makes total sense to me because he's fought 3 times without defending that belt. I know it's not. I know other people have gone longer time without defending the belt, but this is a guy who is healthy and willful and has 3 fights under his belt without defending it. So I have no problem with that. But then all the rest of it, it's all convoluted. I mean, yeah, you award it to Aldo, but I hate interim belts in any context. But this takes interim belts from the ridiculous to the uber ridiculous, because first of all, why do you need an interim belt? Is for if you're going to have one. I don't believe they ever should have one, but if they are going to have one, they should have it when somebody is injured and they need somebody in the interim. Jose Aldo is not injured. What do they need a champion in the interim of what? What is Aldo? They could just schedule a title fight for Aldo. This fight between Pettis and Holloway is no better than it was before, when it was not for a belt. It was for the opportunity to fight for a belt, and that's what it should have been, and that's what it should still be. So I mean, I feel like they've kind of muddied the waters, and they've also kind of they're irritating McGregor and the whole boxing license thing. I mean that's kind of like so what? I mean, he can't fight in a boxing match until the UFC gives him the go-ahead. So, I mean, that's kind of like him just tweaking them a little bit, I guess. But I think they did the right thing with the belt, but then they did the wrong thing.
It's almost so ludicrous that I don't even buy that it was in their own minds they thought they were saving UFC 206. In other words, it's so crazy. And these are the guys who are in the pay-per-view business. They know it's not going to add any pay-per-view buys. They know that. Now maybe it makes the poster a little bit better down the road when the eventual winner of 206 fights Aldo or something. But that even of itself isn't going to sell any buys. I honestly, I'm not sure I think this, but I don't think we can exclude the possibility they were like, you know what? This is our chance to get the belt right away from Conor McGregor. Because we have this injury, we can give the belt to Aldo, we can create a phony one out of thin air that will exist for 3 months or something, 2 fights, and it's gone forever, and then we can use that opportunity to take it from him because they're doing it in close proximity to your point from UFC 205. They're not letting him stew with it and consider this to be like part of his identity, and even though it is,
Yeah.
And I think that it was just an opportunity. I mean, I'm not saying it was, but I don't think we can exclude the possibility that it sounds so, to your point, it's so ham-fisted and so ludicrous. You're like, wait a second, you're not doing that. Maybe it's for an alternative purpose. That's kind of how I feel about it.
Do you think that they've only empowered him by doing this? That was the theory I threw. I feel like
they're
he's now
playing. Let me tell you one thing. They're playing with fire with this. They are super playing
Haven't they
with fire.
turned him into an even more sympathetic figure because people feel like he's been wronged by the UFC? Like, I feel like a lot of people are saying, like, Conor's the champ, this guy's a fake champ. You're only making him into a bigger...
I think that part of it was going to happen no matter what, because, whether you take the belt away from him or not, there's going to be a lot of people who are going to say, well, McGregor's the best 145-pounder out there, even if he's not fighting in that division.
They had to get him on board. He had to be a part of the announcement. But the way they did it by just saying...
No, they weren't going to get him to... I don't think they were going to get him to do it willfully unless they
could have paid him off.
Unless they paid him a lot of money. But
seriously,
look,
you needed to get Conor's stamp of approval for the public to get behind this as well, because if you're not getting the public behind it, you're doing a disservice to Holloway, Pettis, and Aldo. No one's going to consider them the real champ because Conor's still going to parade around.
Even if they got the belt back, you can't. Pardon my language. You can't unfuck that division. It's not going to work. Everyone is still going to look at Aldo like a lesser. Everyone is still going to look at Holloway like a lesser.
Something like this happened, the last time a champion lost his belt, not related to a drug test or some kind of criminal act, was when George St. Pierre vacated the title after UFC 167. And what did they do? They held a conference call with Dana White and George St. Pierre, and Dana wasn't happy about him leaving. Just look at that press conference the night of the fight. But they faced the music, and they were both on board with it.
St. Pierre didn't go to middleweight and then taunt all the welterweights.
Fair enough.
Big difference.
You need to have Conor speak about it. You need to put on a press conference. You needed to make it seem like he was at least somewhat on board with it.
But if you have him at a press conference speaking about it, he's going to speak about it with his own interest at heart, not their interest. Look, bottom line, when Conor McGregor fought Eddie Alvarez just a couple weeks ago in the Garden, two guys were legitimate champions. That was a legitimate super fight, champion versus champion. When Conor McGregor fought Jose Aldo, that was not champion versus champion. Even though Conor McGregor was the interim belt holder, there's not a person in the world who thought of that as a champion versus champion fight. It was Jose Aldo, the world champion, against the challenger, Conor McGregor. And that's the bottom line. When the winner of Holloway versus Pettis goes up against Aldo, if Aldo decides to defend that belt, it's going to be Jose Aldo defending the belt against a challenger. It's not going to be a champion.
Well, but what
champion.
about the belt that Jose Aldo got?
It was vacated. It was taken away from. It was. I mean,
Could you imagine if Conor McGregor would have lost to Eddie Alvarez? What would they have done then? Because then he would have only had one belt, still the featherweight title.
Totally different story.
What would they have done? Because if they feel like they need, and I know you're questioning this, but historically they have felt that they need a title on the line for a pay-per-view to exist, right? If they can't make it, they're not going to do it.
They haven't done it every time, but
historically, I mean,
they tried.
I'm trying to think off the top of my head. I think the last non-title fight pay-per-view
was what, Crow Cop Mir?
Well, no, it was Diaz McGregor, but that was a weird one because it happened, 11 months and then. But prior to that was Diaz Nick against Anderson.
Yep.
I know Rashad Evans, Dan Henderson, but historically they have felt that they needed. What if Conor was just a singular champion? What would they have done? Pettis Holloway not good enough? If Pettis Holloway is not good enough to main event Sands belt, then what are you doing? You don't need the belt. Just have faith in your guys and promote them, and the people will come.
And all of this is compounded by the fact that they have probably too many events, and we can't exclude that. There are greater contexts here.
100%.
And we should note it. All of this is also a product of the fact that they couldn't strike a deal with GSP. If GSP is fighting at Toronto and Daniel Cormier falls out, oh, that sucks. Well, we have the greatest welterweight of all time headlining. We'll be just fine. A lot of this is them playing hardball all the time, and when bad things happened as a consequence of it, they had no ace in the hole.
And UFC 205 was so stacked the way it
That's
was
another thing,
that
yep.
the cards around it have suffered, and the one immediately after it, the one pay-per-view after it, is gonna suffer because of it, at least in some part.
Yeah, that is the byproduct of stacking cards.
there's a cost to it.
Back in the day when you stacked the pay-per-view, you had the next pay-per-view 2 months later.
Right.
It wouldn't suffer. But now with so many fight nights in between pay-per-views, it's impossible to stack the deck
Let
like
me say
that.
something, though, in defense of UFC that I think should be said. I do think we want to live in a world where the UFC has the majority, not all, the majority of the latitude in deciding who gets stripped and when interim titles are created. I do think that this issue, like when should they create it, when shouldn't they? I believe that this is what a union should do. They should bargain this out. Here are the rules, and we can strip. And in that space, the UFC has some known latitude. So Conor could have known, hey man, if I don't defend this for a year, they're just going to take it. Right? That's what they should do. But I don't want to be in a world where fighters are so powerful that they can I don't know what Conor's going to do here. This is a little bit of uncharted territory. Frankly, not much scary, but we need this fleshed out. We need this codified because I don't want both sides just playing hardball with each other. I feel like someone's going to end up a big-time loser in the end.
Well, here's my dream. I threw this out on Monday. If there is an association, and of course there are the owners of the UFC, if they could come together and appoint a commissioner, honestly, a commissioner of the UFC, and you give the guy a 5-year deal, and you can't get fired from that deal. So Dana White can't get mad at him and kick him out, and neither can the association. And that guy sets rules that they both collectively bargain, and just like we need to turn this into a real sport because, as you said, we don't know what the rules are. I believe that if you don't have a fight booked within the 12 months of winning the belt or last defending the belt, then you are fully, you should be fully expected to get stripped. Like I actually have no problem with the UFC saying, look, you haven't defended the belt, you have no intention of defending the belt within a year, and this is a number that I just made up. It feels fair. I have no problem with them stripping it. It's the how and the why. Yeah. It's the how they did it and the reason why. They did it because Daniel Cormier got injured, and the injury to the light heavyweight champion should have nothing to do with the featherweight champion getting stripped. And if you had someone kind of overseeing it, like an ombudsman, so to speak, a guy saying that, look, I have no say in this matter from a financial standpoint, the UFC success on pay-per-view, to the fighters' purses, whatever. Obviously, there's a bit of a conflict there because it's one singular entity and it's not, 30 teams and the commissioner. I know it's not apples to apples, but if you had sort of a guy in the middle making these rules and they would come together, I feel like things would get a little better.
It's funny because the UFC probably never would have supported any kind of idea like that before because they've always been the ones who've been in control of everything. Now they're not in control. I guarantee you, well, I believe that the next time Conor McGregor makes an appearance, a public appearance that somehow represents, the UFC or fighting or whatever, he will have 2 championship belts over his shoulders, and he 100%. because he will from now until forever will walk around holding those 2 belts because in his mind he never lost either one of those belts. Now even though I do support the stripping of the belts, if they'd handle it in a better way, then maybe that kind of thing wouldn't happen. But I think it'll happen.
What's more powerful?
I just don't want to be in a world where, what's the rule? What's going to happen?
Of course.
Whatever you can get away with.
Yeah, no,
that's
it can't
bad
be
for
like that.
promoters and it's bad for fighters.
Yeah, it can't be like that. What's more powerful than being UFC champion, in my opinion, being the people's champion?
But
and he's going to walk around with that belt that people view as the real belt, and now all of a sudden, I think the people are behind him more so than ever. Let me ask you about this. Do you think if they were going to go through the trouble of potentially kind of hurting the relationship, and we know that they've had some bumps in the road. If they're going to go through the trouble of stripping Conor McGregor, should they have made Holloway Pettis for the actual, real featherweight belt? Because Jose Aldo has been saying, I'm going to retire, I'm going to throw fights. We don't know the state of your career. So in order to really give those guys the respect that they deserve, if you're going to go through the exercise of taking the belt away from him, don't you have to make that fight the real featherweight title fight?
I can go either way on that one. I just think it's silly to put the title on the line in that fight, period, whether it's an interim title or the actual
Holloway deserves to be
title.
Fighting for the belt.
100% he does, but not in this situation. I mean, in a better situation. Also, as a promoter, there is value to having power, having your belts empowered. There's value for a promoter in having your belts valued, right? And this is devaluing the belt even further, what they've done here. So maybe that would have valued the belts a little bit more if the undisputed title was on the line between Holloway and Pettis, because you can't say that the winner of that fight lost in 13 seconds to McGregor. Now, Holloway did lose to McGregor, but it was a few years ago. It was a tough fight. It was a decision. It wasn't a 13-second knockout. So maybe there's more credibility, I guess, in the sense that you could do that, and the winner has more credibility as the undisputed champion. On the other hand, Aldo is the interim champion, and what does that mean?
But that interim title fight was so fugazi. I mean, it was 6 months after he just beat Aldo. It was just to make 200. But
this is what happens when you keep digging the hole. You have to keep digging.
That's why they should have just gotten rid of all the interim.
Right.
You take the belt away from Conor, you got to make that fight for the real belt.
On the other hand, too, Jose Aldo did beat Frankie Edgar handily in July, and there's something to be said for that as well. Frankie Edgar is a phenomenal fighter. For sure, the second guy in line after Aldo and after McGregor. So you can't just say, well, you were the interim champion and now you beat Frankie Edgar in July. That's great, but we're going to take the belt from you, and now you have nothing.
I still feel like Aldo wants to be crown champion.
I think that's the thing. I think that he's kind of a wild card right now, and I don't know that I agree with Mark. I don't know that I would support making this Holloway Pettis fight for the actual champion. First of all, Anthony Pettis has been on a bit of a slide. So if he goes out there and wins it
as a featherweight.
There you go.
It doesn't matter.
So you're a natural promoter. Right, but Jose Aldo was also.
That doesn't matter.
But Jose Aldo was, I found it troubling. I don't where I read this where heard it when Aldo was saying something about instead of having this belt, what he wants is really the rematch with McGregor. That's what he wants. That more.
Sure.
Well, that's just the wrong approach. I mean, obviously you want to. I understand that you want to avenge a loss, but. Get yourself your championship. Get your belt, become a champion, and once you have that belt around your waist, a lot better things start happening for you. And to sort of like turn your back to that and say, I'm going to retire if I don't get a fight with McGregor, I just seem like I think he's a guy that needs a little better representation.
Look, we've been over this before, and I'm a firm believer in, to the most part, adhering to the architecture of champion contenders, and they all get their shot. I just want to point out, look at all this discussion. This is what happens when a guy wins a title and doesn't defend it. You have a mess that they leave, especially when they go on to do more incredible things, like taking the title from the guy from the weight class above. This is not an ordinary situation. I don't suggest otherwise. But when you have this weird situation where a guy beats the champ, moves, doesn't defend, that champ gets pissed because he can't get a rematch, and then injuries happen, and how do you fill cards? It creates a disaster. So this is my point. If you're going to let a guy not defend his title, you better have a damn good reason to do it. Otherwise, it is a disaster.
Two other quick things, going back to our first topic. I mean, I think we all would love to see fighters get paid more, and I think the one silver lining here is that Max Holloway and Anthony Pettis get paid more because they are fighting for a belt. Fake belt or not, per their contract, they're both getting paid more.
And Max Holloway told me personally he was actually excited to have that belt if he wins it.
Sure.
He was it was a thrill for him.
The other thing is, not that long ago, 3 or so years ago, I believe the UFC was the most accessible media-friendly organization out there, sports organization, and their president, there was no more media-friendly in terms of you got 45 minutes with him pre-event, 45 minutes post-event, press conferences. I mean, you couldn't get enough Dana White, right? Now, no one said anything. And I think that they've almost gone to being one of the least accessible sports organizations. And it would be nice to have someone on behalf of the company speak about what is going on, the reason why we did this. You can't do that to John Anik and Dan Hardy and just trot them out on TV, have them read off a piece of paper. The greatest fighter in the sport today as far as fame, fortune, maybe skill, has just been stripped of his belt for no particular reason. We're not explaining why. It's not fair to those two guys. Someone needs to answer these questions, in my opinion. One last thing on Conor, because we are running out of time. I just want to quickly ask you guys, the news that he has acquired this boxing license, is that just his way of responding to the belt, or do you think that he has serious intentions of exploring a boxing career?
I keep saying this. I don't know what he's going to do, but if you put a boundary in front of him, he's going to see if he can get past it. Now, maybe he has no intentions of actually fighting Mayweather, but maybe he does have intentions of seeing if he could actually make a fight like that happen, right? How far can I push this? What can I really do? What can I really access if I just push hard enough. And so I think, is it leverage? Probably it's just leverage. You got stripped and I'm going to raise the ante. And I think this is a bit of a scary game of chicken. I don't want to see it play out as far as it could go, but I'm telling you, man, you draw a line in the sand and this guy's going to kick it.
Yeah, he's got and money. Mayweather is money, right? That's the nickname, and that's the nickname that I think Conor McGregor is going to. He's the notorious. Well, I think he might want to, see if he can, win that nickname away from Mayweather just by getting him to sign on the dotted line. I mean, that is all he talks about is he wants his piece of the pie, and I know he's talked about wanting a piece of ownership in the UFC and all these different things. But one of the ways in which they can make him a happy guy is to let him do that. And I think it would be a horrible spectacle. I don't think it would be a very pleasant night for him in the ring. But he'd make a lot of money, and the next day he'd cash a huge check.
Quick final thing on this.
It's probably just leverage, but it makes me think if this is obviously probably another savvy move on his part, because we're entering to 2017 with a lot of unknown in the UFC. Ronda Rousey fights December 30th, but will she fight again after that? No one really has any idea. There is kind of a scarcity of big stars, a scarcity of potential pay-per-view buys out there, and McGregor provides a lot of those. So the ball is very much in his court heading into this year.
Super duper last thing. Conor is not part of this MMA blah, blah, blah. He's not part of any of those. But here's the interesting part. I mentioned pushing boundaries. I think he's just in it for himself, and there's nothing wrong with that. He doesn't have to be in it for anybody if he doesn't want to be. It'd be nice if he was, but whatever. But this conflict between this clause in the contract that says the UFC is basically your sole promoter, and now you have a boxing license, I have protections under the Federal Ali Act. If he finds some kind of way to resolve that in favor of the Ali Act, he is changing the game. Yes. He is finding ways to protect fighters, even if it's just a trickle-down effect.
Yes.
One quick one. You introduced this segment. There's a little part as the biggest star in the sport, Conor McGregor. Well, I just want to also remind everybody that the actual best fighter in the sport.
Well, don't take away my segue.
Is competing.
Don't take away. I mean, when did you become the host, Jeff?
Well, I thought you said final things.
No, come on. I was going to talk about DJ, our guy, Mighty Mouse. I'm a huge fan of this particular show. He watches it every week. Well, you think I would disrespect him as he has been disrespected, perhaps promotionally malpractice-like from the UFC? Okay, let me. What do you want to say about
I just want to say that he's known as Mighty Mouse, but he should be known by another superhero, the Invisible Man, because here we've talked for an hour and we have not even mentioned the poor guy, and he is the best fighter in the business right now, the best active fighter.
Look at White Knight Wagenheim over here, just
also introducing him in the saddest terms imaginable.
I mean, who, me?
No, him.
Oh, okay. Well, just it's unbelievable. Okay. Let's finish on Mr. Mighty Mouse, because we have run out of time. So we find out last night officially he is going to fight Tim Elliott on Saturday, because Tim Elliott won TUF 24. What did we learn? Well, just right off the bat, the UFC brought in all these champions from all these different organizations, and they had him fight in this tournament. And the guy who was the former UFC fighter beat all the guys who weren't already in the UFC. So I'm not quite sure if we actually learned much from this actual tournament. The guy who used to be in the UFC is better than the guys who never were in the UFC. But kudos to Tim Elliott. He wins the tournament. And now the UFC has essentially 72 hours to promote a Demetrious Johnson title fight. Are you surprised that they waited that long? Why not do the last episode last week so you have 10 days? Is that a problem, or is DJ fighting enough?
It is definitely a problem. If you're really going to make an earnest attempt to promote Demetrious Johnson and promote this fight and this fight card, how can you do it 3 days out? Beginning 3 days out. It doesn't make sense to me. I mean, I can't imagine that that Fox couldn't have been more flexible for FS1 to maybe bump it a week earlier. I know the baseball playoffs were kind of in the middle of the season. They took a few weeks sabbatical, but if you're really trying to promote this guy, and they should, and it really anyone watching and these hardcore fans who complain about things that we're talking about with belts and the valuation of belts and that kind of stuff, who really value MMA, you better watch Demetrious Johnson fight on Saturday. That's all I'm saying. If you're gonna go on Twitter and complain about some of these things, you better watch the best fighter in the world fight. You better get as many
Arguably.
He's the best fighter. He's the best. If John Jones is out of play, Demetrious Johnson is the pound for pound best fighter in the world. So you better watch him fight. If you're gonna harp on these hardcore fan issues and talk about that kind of stuff, you just better get that rating up as far as you can go and tell the UFC this is what we want. We want the actual best, not the most drawing power guys.
Yeah, you reap what you sow. The UFC basically made Demetrious Johnson invisible essentially by not even revealing who he was going to be fighting until 3 days before the fight. And so, we sat here talking for an hour about union or association. Then we talked about Conor McGregor, who has no fights lined up. And the next time he fights might not even be in MMA. It might be a boxing. Who knows? And then we sneak in a little tiny word just to get in there, the fact that this guy's fighting.
Why are you making me feel so bad here?
But it's not on us. It's on these guys. They don't even, if they don't even tell you until, and look, they should have had this thing last night live to give Demetrius his chance. Make this guy, make Tim Elliott, fight twice in a week just to give poor Mighty Mouse a chance against the winner of the champions, the champion versus champion, tough finale. Man, this is gonna be.
But
tough.
you remember Tough 4 when Lytle and Luder won? They won the finale to get the title fight in November, and then they were supposed to fight in.
Disastrous finale, though.
Yes, but they were supposed to fight in February. Of course, GSP got injured, so he fought Serra in March. But Luder fought Anderson in February, so they had 4 months to then promote the title fight. Right. I don't understand the idea of waiting until the Wednesday before.
They have too many shows. They have too many masters they have to serve. So they have to give all these fight nights to Fox. They have to find a way to and they want to. I think they all want to make it hand in glove. Like you have the show on FS1, the result will be on FS1, kind of thing.
Could have done it a couple months earlier.
There's a lot of things they could have done.
Yeah,
but here's the truth about it. First of all, I like Tim Elliott. I think he's a really good fighter, and I don't think he's got much of a chance. Probably he's going to get put through the wood chipper, but he's a tough guy who's been up there.
You never know.
You never know. But all likelihood, Demetrius wins and he wins handily. So if that happens, what do they have to do? I really think they got to get creative with him. Anderson Silva was a star before the Forrest Griffin fight, but he took another level after that. And Forrest Griffin wasn't the best light heavyweight, but he was just the right one to make Anderson Silva look like magic in there. They got to find someone with Demetrius Johnson, not merely in the bantamweight division, but they got to pay Demetrius Johnson some money to take a 140-pound catchweight fight, even a 145-pound catchweight fight.
Whoa.
I believe that. Find a guy who would be just the right matchup. Not the very, very best featherweight or bantamweight, but someone who would match up with him uniquely where you're like, whoa, let's see how mighty you are, Mighty Mouse. And I bet you he would rise to the occasion. And it's some kind of fun twist like that that's going to make the most use out of his name. But you got to pay him to do it.
What about champion versus champion? Is it time?
Sure, that'd be fine too. Any kind of interesting angle. I'm just saying, it doesn't have to be like fight the number 7 bantamweight. No, find someone interesting. Okay. And let's make that happen.
All right.
I bet you Scott Coker could do it.
I find every Mighty Mouse fight interesting, though. That's the thing. That's
really?
the
Against Tim Elliott, really?
Well, no, but
You're sitting there like, oh my God.
Every time I've seen Mighty Mouse in the octagon, he has made it interesting, either with his opponent or just the way he's fought
He's a ninja.
himself. The guy is just an amazing competitor, and I've sat cage side and heard the boos cascading down upon us. And so, sometimes some things just are inexplicable, and that's one of them.
Final word to the newbie.
Mighty Mouse versus Thomas Almeida.
Oh, I'd love that. Come on, how do you not in favor of that? Something like that.
I just kind of feel like, why not?
How about Mighty Mouse versus Dennis Bermudez? Who wouldn't want to see that?
Well, actually, I'm told Dennis Bermudez has something interesting lined up. But I will say that
CM Punk.
He's huge.
You said that he's the pound for pound king.
Demetrius Johnson versus CM Punk is a fight I can get behind.
Who's his last loss to?
Dominic Cruz.
Who's arguably the pound for pound king?
Oh, I mean,
right?
Number 3.
Could you imagine? I feel like that's a big deal. Cruz, if Cruz gets by Garbrandt, Cruz versus that's a great fight.
Yeah, the story there.
But that's what I'm talking about. Forget all this line them up stuff.
Fair.
Let's twist it.
All right. We are done, out of time. Thank you so much for watching this episode of the MMA Beat. Wow, so much going on, right? What a fun time.
We could do another hour.
We could absolutely do another hour. There is so much more to talk about, but unfortunately, we have reached the end of this week's episode. Again, Demetrius Johnson, arguably, but you can make a very strong argument. Best fighter in the world is fighting this Saturday. You should support that. And he kind of strikes me as the kind of guy who will appreciate a hell of a lot more once he's gone, right? We'll be talking about Demetrius for many years to come. That is this Saturday. It's a fantastic card, by the way. Masvidal, Ellenberger, Benavidez, Cejudo. Yep. Great fights on Saturday on FS1. All right, for now, we'll say goodbye. For Luke, Jeff, Mark, feel better, Chuck. I'm Ariel. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next week. Enjoy the fights.